Welcome to part 2, Literary Analysis 101. In the last discussion, I went through the first half of the PowerPoint up to the point where it says start here. Obviously, with the video, it just has the nice, lovely title slide for the presentation in general. Last time we looked at the literary devices and tools that could be used to analyze a piece of literature. Talked about diction, talked about tone, detail, and imagery. And now I want to jump into the heart of literature itself. I want to talk about the pieces that make a story complete. And I don't want to do this in such a level of detail that it really turns the course again into more of a literature course than a writing course. But I want to give you just enough understanding to be able to write your paper successfully. So our first spot is going to start off with just looking at the elements of literature that I kind of want to focus on today. I want to look at plot, conflict, theme, and characterization. They're both, all four of these are driving components of fiction. They certainly play a part in short stories, novels, and pieces of epic poetry, as it mentions, to be discussed in another course. I highly encourage, if you want to know more about epic poetry, take one of our fine literature or an American literature, world literature, British literature courses. You'll certainly get a taste for it in some of those. But back to the discussion. These four elements actually kind of are the driving piece behind a story. They're the most important aspects in all of a story being able to be put together. So it's a good spot to spend our little bit of time together talking about, well, elements of literature. Plot is one of those things that people have seen from a very early stage in education. If you went to school in the state of Texas, more than likely you were introduced to plot, let's say about elementary school, later half of it. In some cases, you may not have been introduced to it yet if you came from a different educational setting, but for the most part, Texas schools have covered plot because plot's the heartbeat of a story. It's the story. It's the creation of some sort of conflict, some sort of issue that pops up within an environment where the characters are interesting and engaging, and we follow characters, usually either one or a small band of them, through a series of events by which they will either resolve the conflict or they'll bring it to a certain conclusion before moving off towards the next part of their journey or into a new journey in its entirety. And most people are exposed to it. They see it through something called a Freytag model. And I've got two versions of the Freytag model. I've got the complicated version here, which has a lot of text on it and provides a lot of information. I always believe in if you can show somewhere where something came from, do it. This is where it came from. But I also believe if you can make it simpler, let's do that instead. Plot components and all really are simple. Now what you've got, and the little marker thing here will help me along with it, so just follow the arrow. We've got exposition. It's this leg right here on the left-hand side. This is the start of the story. Usually you'll introduce characters, the setting. It's usually where you get a chance to have a good feel for what is supposedly important within the story itself. There's no major conflict yet, no major situation that needs to be solved, nothing like that. The conflict will come into existence usually right about here, and it's very quick. Note, the bulk of the story is this huge up and down movement. The two ends are relatively small, and in a good story, it won't take you long to go from exposition to something needs to be taken care of. Now, once the conflict is revealed, and then we have what's called rising action. This is a series of events that will take place until the ultimate overall conflict comes to its head. It comes to its end. It comes to a climax. Now, it's worth noting that plot isn't just a case of, just one straight rise up. Sometimes there are mini arcs that will happen with the story and little mini conflicts and stuff that are part of the bigger one. And so you can certainly have the model kind of zigzagging a little bit in there. But for simplicity's sake, here's the main big conflict starts here, and the big conflict's being exposed, being dealt with. You're preparing for battle, preparing for some sort of mission. They're going to engage the bad guy, going to have the two lovers finally get together with one another, whatever the case may be. And then you hit the climax, which is the turning point. This is when whatever the conflict is resolved. Something happens and there's no more conflict after you get done with this point. It's the top point. It's the peak of the action, the peak of the build. And then you start what's called falling action. Now, depending on the movie, falling action can actually be relatively short. Same thing with a book or a play. It just depends on what they want to do with it. If it's something really dramatic where the after events of the climax are very important, they're very meaningful, where there's a little bit more story still to be told, then the following action is going to take a while. It's going to be, wrapping up and taking care of the things that need to happen in order for the characters to then peacefully, and you as the audience, peacefully move forward past the story. Resolution, it happens right at the end of falling action, and this, in essence, is tying together any loose threads and moving on to the next tale. Old classic westerns, I think, did this better than any because it's usually the point where the hero would hop on the back of the horse and ride straight off into the sunset. You had falling action after the gun shootout and stuff. They dealt with burying whoever needed to, saving the town, everybody being happy, life getting back to normal, and then resolution, off goes the hero into the sunset. Now, that's a simplistic way of putting it, but simplistic's fine. I mean, it works for our purposes. So, again, exposition, intro to the story, rising action, the conflict is given birth. We have some sort of thing that needs to be fixed. Climax, the situation is resolved one way or the other. Falling action is dealing with the after effects of it, and resolution is the riding off into the sunset. Conflict takes one of four different forms. It's going to have character versus character, so this is a person versus a person. Character versus nature, this is a person versus the environment. Character versus society, where they're trying to come to grips with some sort of societal issue or belief system, something like that. And then there's the internal one, which is unique because it's a character versus themselves. They're having some sort of internal conflict that they have to resolve. It's kind of like that scene in Superman 3 where he's exposed to that weird version of kryptonite with tobacco in it, and it causes him to split Superman and Clark Kent into two pieces, and they have the outward fight. Kind of imagine like that, but it's all happening inside. You don't really get to separate yourself out. So let's look at these four different types of conflict. Conflict 1, character versus character. This type of conflict finds a main character in conflict with another character, human or not human. The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty, and the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wings, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy and yet not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all the birds. In this case, we're kind of at the end point. We're definitely in the falling action side of it. Moving towards resolution of the ugly duckling. The conflict, of course, being the fact that many of the characters despised the ugly duckling and thought he was hideous. They treated him like garbage and everything else like that. And you get the resolution when he evolves himself into this beautiful swan. And the falling action is the whole situation of, them dealing with the fact that now this ugly creature is now one of the most beautiful of all of them, and is being praised and being, adored completely by the birds that had treated him horribly. And he's so overwhelmed by the emotions of it that he has a hard time really embracing the fact that he is now beautiful, and it's something to be happy about. You see a certain level of humility within the character because of this conflict. Character versus nature. And this one is purposely pasted in because if you look at the Dr. Seuss book, sometimes the way he puts stuff in there is for purpose, and you see this leaf design on it. So it's got that already to let you know that it's got something connected to nature in general. But it's characters versus nature. This is where characters are against the forces of nature. It's a truffula seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge of the last of the truffula seeds, and truffula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffula, treat it with care, give it clean water, and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest, protect it from axes that hack, then the Lorax and all of his friends may come back. It's this moralistic lesson, and obviously that's at the end of this particular piece as well. As you can see, it's people versus nature. People have been very abusive in nature. They've caused a great amount of destruction to it, and if people are ready to have nature back, if it's going to come back, if it's going to be able to thrive again and people be able to enjoy it and partake of it, then the moralistic lesson, of course, is the fact that one must come to be in harmony with nature as opposed against it and be able to embrace the wonder of it. So, an interesting thing here. You also see it in other things like the perfect storm that, they were out at sea and the two fronts hit just right and created the perfect storm and they had to go against the water and the environment to be able to survive. That's certainly character versus nature as well. I would like to state as we're going along with this, I hope you may be realizing it's possible that the plot, with all the subplots and stuff that exist in it, you may have a little bit of all of it. I mean, think about Titanic. You had that wonderful, beautiful love story that was taking place and all with the ship and all going down. You had all these little sub-stories within it and all from the different relationships and connections. And then we eventually get to character versus nature when they all start going into the water and freezing to death. And then they're suddenly against nature and they have to try and survive. So, just an interesting fact. Let's keep going. Character versus society conflict. This type of conflict is a main character in conflict with a larger group, a community, society, culture, etc. Scout, said Atticus, nigger lover is just one of them terms that don't mean anything. It's hard to explain. Ignorant, trashy people use it when they think somebody is favoring Negroes over and above themselves. You aren't really a nigger lover, are you? I certainly am. I do my best to love everybody. It's never an insult to be called what somebody thinks is a bad name. It just shows you how poor that person is. It doesn't hurt you, so don't let Ms. DeVoe get you down. This is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is a conversation between Atticus and Scout. They're having a conversation about society, and really that's kind of the heart of this particular piece is you have this attorney, this man who is downright determined to provide true legal defense for an individual that the society has already judged as in need of being killed. Obviously, the story is not his, it's Scout's, and her coming to understand society and trying to come to grips and all with how she fits in it and what she believes and, does society believe right? Does her dad believe right? And she's truly trying to understand the world around her. And we get a clear case of Atticus' stance on this in this particular quote because he shows that for him, terminology and society's opinions really matter very little if they're not well thought out and if they are, if they intend to be harmful or anything else like that. He's happy to embrace the negative term that they've placed upon him, and he views it as being almost a compliment in a large way because he is someone that loves everybody and he has compassion for everybody. Next, we have character versus self, again pulling from To Kill a Mockingbird. This one's Scout towards the end of her journey. If you remember, she was trying to inwardly figure out where she was with society and with herself. She constantly would get into fights with the kids at school because they would provoke her, and she would respond back in turn, usually by beating the snot out of them. And she had to make a decision, was she her version of herself after childhood, was it going to be someone that responded like most of the Southerners in her town of Macomb did with violence and rash behaviors, or was she going to be more like Atticus and be more controlled in her behaviors and not let things as simple as words bother her? And in this one we get perfect evidence of what her choice is. I drew a bead on him, remembered what Atticus had said, then dropped my fist and walked away. Scout's a coward ringing in my ears. It was the first time I ever walked away from a fight. We also have characterization to consider. Characters inside of a book are not all considered equal, and that's actually a good thing. The more variety we have in characters and how they act and all with the main characters certainly can help us have a more engaging piece. Take, for instance, the character of Jarvis in the Avengers, Iron Man, etc. series. Now, this is Jarvis, and this is not Ultron or Vision. He makes a statement whenever he becomes Vision that, he's no longer Jarvis and he's no longer Ultron. He's something different, something more. But in case you're wondering, Jarvis actually stood for just a rather very intelligent system. That's what Tony Stark termed it. And it's a flat character. And a flat character helps move the plot along quickly because the audience understands the character. And they're very simplistic. They're very stereotypical. Jarvis acts this way. He's very logically centered, and while he may make occasional jokes, those jokes are based on, in part, largely from, computer programming. It's not all that unexpected to hear his responses. Sure, it's kind of odd to hear a computer come back with a quip and all, but when you consider who programmed it, is it really all that hard to believe? Ooh, magical sounds. Round characters. A character who is complex and has many sides or traits with unpredictable behavior and a fully developed personality. Antagonists are usually round characters. These are individuals that they may very well mean well in what they do, but because they really have some sort of different perspective of the world around them, they typically will try to do any and everything they can to remake the world into a way that they actually can support, that they can agree with. You take Ultron into consideration. See a theme in my characters. Ultron's a perfect case of this. He was created as a protection entity and all by Tony Stark and of course Bruce Banner, or if you prefer the comic books, he was created as a protection entity by our original Ant-Man, Hank Pym. In either case, he's created to protect the world, and his creators program him with this, ability, this intelligence algorithm to analyze what's causing the greatest amount of suffering and harm within the world. Each case, he comes to the conclusion that it's humans. If the humans don't exist, then there can't be this chaos that he's supposed to get rid of. So if he's supposed to get rid of the chaos, he's supposed to get rid of the humans. And that makes him an enemy, because that type of, pure and simple blind logic where, there's true black and white to the world and no sense of gray, that suddenly makes it into a situation that people can't permit, and you wind up having war or, mass destruction, a battle, and of course the vanquishing of that particular character. Dynamic characters are usually our heroes. These are characters that change in personality or attitude throughout a story. Now, I'll be honest, I get a little tired of it with the Avengers series and all, because they almost always seem like they have a little bit of a backtrack in it. That's what sequels will do to you. If you watch a real good movie, you have a character that you're introduced to, and then they go through some sort of change, some sort of growth, some sort of movement beyond who they currently are and their limitations or their weaknesses. They either embrace them or surpass them, and when they do that, it makes them the perfect candidate to take down that wonderful antagonist that is unpredictable. It's great to see that type of change as it progresses a character forward and moves them into new arenas. And I think we could argue that that's certainly happening within the Avengers series. But in movies like the Avengers and whatnot, where they're working with pre-existing canon, you've got Tony Stark, who pretty much relapses every movie. He does it also in almost every comic arc. He kind of slides back into the same narcissistic ways, even though he keeps realizing he's not supposed to. Captain America always goes back to being goody two-shoes, even though he sometimes wants to try and embrace the fact that the world needs him to be a little bit more vicious at moments and not the old Boy Scout that he is. But still, these characters still do define our protagonists. They're always the heroes. They're the individuals and all that move forward and move past limitations that have been placed upon them, and then those limitations are put there so they can move past them. It's what makes the story good. And then static characters. These are characters that don't change in any form, fashion, or shape. Atticus Finch is a perfect example of this in To Kill a Mockingbird. You have to stick with To Kill a Mockingbird. You cannot use Go Tell the Watchman, because if you use that one, then it messes us up, and we have to get into the debate of whether or not he's actually become cynical or not. That's not this course. But these are characters that do not change their behaviors. Atticus is a perfect example of this in To Kill a Mockingbird. He's constantly provoked by people that are hateful, that are full of viciousness, that try to do him wrong, his family wrong, and all sorts of things. And he always meets it with a relatively calm, very focused demeanor, which is... it's hard for us, I think, to accept, because we're not very static people in and of ourselves. But in some ways, it makes these individuals either the person that we admire the most, or it makes them the person and all that we despise the most, depending on how we view their adherence to their ethics and what we view their ethics to actually be. Theme. This is a central idea or insight about life or human behavior that a story reveals. In most stories, the theme is not stated directly. You have to actually spend some time digging into it to figure out what it is. The subject is simply a topic. It's not, it can't be stated easily. Well, let me rephrase this. The theme is not the same thing as the subject. The subject is simply the topic. It can be stated in a single word, such as loyalty. The subject of this movie is loyalty, heroism, valor, whatever the case may be. Themes are actually much more complex. They actually require a sentence to be able to truly capture what they really are. Like, loyalty to a leader is not always noble. That's certainly much more, explicit than loyalty itself. If you're talking about loyalty, then you've got a huge spectrum you could focus on. But if you look more at a thematic level, then obviously the moral of the story, or the focus of the story, the thing we're going to take from the story is loyalty to a leader is not always a noble thing. That means, obviously, in this story, I would guess the leader's done something bad, and being loyal to them is the wrong thing to do. Don't accept the story's theme as valid just because the story is in print or on your TV or your computer. Is the theme too simplistic, too idealistic, too cynical? Do they actually suggest a theme that is even plausible, or do they have some sort of magical, fantastical theme and all that has no plausibility within reality? And is that something that makes it more successful, or does it actually hurt it? It's a good question. Evaluation of theme's quality is another area you can use for criticism, evaluation, analysis, and it's perfectly a good option for this current essay. So that does conclude the PowerPoint presentation on the next essay. After you get done watching these, I highly encourage you to jump down into the prompt itself and give it a look-see. I will be presenting our weekly video with due dates, peer revision, and everything else like that on this particular essay soon. The other item in this particular section is the self-evaluation. And unlike the past ones where the self-evaluation was for the essay in the previous module, this one is for this essay. So we're going to have a little wait before we can get around to answering and filling out that one. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I will see you on the net.